Today is a celebration of Ronald Reagan. Tonight I'm going to a dinner that celebrates Ronald Reagan, and they're gonna have someone that worked in his time in the White House, and Ronald Reagan was president from 1981 to 1989. He was the 40th president of the United States of America. The first memories I remember about Ronald Reagan is I was coming home from school, and I lived in Texas at the time, and I lived with my aunt, and next door to the aunt was the babysitters. So I went to the babysitters to, because I got babysat after school until my aunt came home, but I went into the babysitters, and they said, "Go next door, your aunt is home." So I went next door. I had to knock on the door because the door was locked, and my aunt came and opened the door, and she said, "Come on in." And as I was coming in, she was watching the news, and on the news was President Reagan got shot, and that was March 30th, 1981. That's the first memories I have of something tragic, basically, that happened in my younger years. And there is a quote that Ronald Reagan says that I like. "Life is one grand sweet song, so start the music." So you go find your song and start your music, and you go attack the day today in your neighborhood, and hopefully I can get a picture or a video of all the people that are celebrating Ronald Reagan's birthday tonight. And thanks for watching, and click that like button and hit that subscribe button over here, and leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching. Ronald Reagan's birthday cake. Getting video of it before they cut it. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Mr. President. Happy birthday to you.
But we're about to hear Peggy talk about 10 years with one of the greatest human beings, Ronald Reagan. After he passed in June of 2004 at 93, she stayed in very close touch with Nancy Reagan until her passing in March of 2016. That is when she decided to write her book, The President Will See You Now. I hope you enjoy it as much as I have. John Rowerding gave each member of last year's dinner committee a copy of that book, and that is what sparked us to invite her to speak to us this year. I give you Peggy Grandy. Fasten your nostalgic seatbelts.
That was incredible, very difficult to follow, and I feel a little bit, if we were at the debates, I felt almost like he's lurking. I'm here, but here, well, I'm just honored to share the stage here with you, Mr. President. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here tonight. Yes, I did come from the left coast, and so how wonderful and refreshing it is to be in a place where I don't have to be so aware of being so politically correct. So here's to be politically incorrect tonight and talking about wonderful things like Clean Day. And about our shared love and affection for President Reagan and our admiration for his life, his leadership, and his legacy. I truly feel like one of the luckiest women in the world to have had the opportunity to sit at this great man's feet, not just for 10 hours, although that would have been incredible, and I would have been so grateful for that, but for 10 incredible years. And how grateful I am for the opportunity to share some of those stories with you tonight. I truly had a front row seat to history, and I started actually as an intern in President Reagan's office. In 1989, he had just left office. He came from Washington, D.C. back to Los Angeles. I was always that nerdy little kid that loved presidents and politics and government, which if you grew up in the Beltway, I think was pretty normal, but I grew up in Southern California and back in the day when girls didn't really even pay attention to politics. So my parents didn't quite know what to do with me, and so they kind of pushed me out the door and said good luck to me. Fortunately, my father raised me to believe that somebody's got to have the job that you want, and it might as well be you. So I took a chance in college. I was a communications major. The great communicator had been in the White House and he had just returned to my backyard. So I took a chance. I wrote a letter, back old school, on a typewriter, sent it to the office of Ronald Reagan, asking for an opportunity to work there. I was brought in for an interview. I was hired basically on the spot to serve as an intern in the office. At the end of my internship, I was hired as the executive assistant to the chief of staff and served in that capacity for another 2 years or so. And then Ronald Reagan's longtime executive assistant he had had since before he was governor retired. And they called one night and asked if I would take that job. And you don't say no to that, of course, but I was 6 months pregnant with my first baby. I wasn't quite sure how life was going to work out, but fast forward all those years, I got married. I had 3 of my 4 children while I was working for President Reagan, and was always so grateful for the graciousness and the way in which Ronald and Nancy Reagan welcomed me, my family, my children into their home and into their lives. And what a blessing that was. So a little bit about the book. I don't know if anybody in here has written a book before. There's usually a lot of people who have thought about writing a book. I actually never thought about writing a book. In fact, I was adamantly opposed to writing a book because with proximity to an individual comes also a certain stewardship and responsibility. But I was speaking at an event a couple of years ago and was approached after the event about writing a book, and I gave my stock answer of, no, I would never do that. And the gentleman said something that I couldn't quite shake out of my head, and he said, if there was a woman who sat outside Abraham Lincoln's office door every day for 10 years, don't you think we would want to know what she saw, what she learned, what she experienced? And don't you think she would owe it to history to tell us? So that's my story. The President Will See You Now. It's not a political book. It's very personal. It's a story of a great man of faith, of character, of principles. He was somebody who I watched very closely behind the scenes. The book kind of takes you with me to parallel my life and to see his as I saw him. And in the pages of the book, I hope you will find excitement of traveling with him, the thrill of going up to the house with him, the joy of being in the office with him, seeing him interact with everybody from world leaders and heads of state to ordinary patriotic Americans who came into the office. And through my stories, I hope you will be reminded of your own. Everybody had some recollection of Ronald Reagan, whether or not you ever met him in person. We all have something that connected with us deeply with him. And so I hope that through my stories, they will evoke your own. So I'm going to share a few pictures tonight. My girls, I have a son and 3 daughters, and my kids kind of cringe because, some of the pictures in here are fashions and hairstyles of the 80s and 90s, and not always the best look, but we were all there, right? One of the things I noticed about Ronald Reagan working for him is how he led and how he lived, and the two were really in great alignment. Some people talk about leadership and it doesn't matter how you live your life, but Ronald Reagan was somebody who truly lived the life that he talked about, as leadership and the way he lived were truly in alignment. I consider myself, one of the luckiest women in the world, a front row seat to history. All of those years, yes, here's a lovely sweater. My job working for him completely ran the spectrum. So in the White House, he had a huge staff that worked for him and served his every need. He came out to LA, and there was just a handful of us that worked for him. So we all wore lots of hats. As his executive assistant, I had the duty and the honor of everything from talking on the phone to Buckingham Palace, to ushering in world leaders, to making sure he had toothpaste in his bathroom if he wanted to brush his teeth, or cash in his pocket if he wanted to go get his haircut. I could liken a day to meeting people at the front, introducing them to the president, snapping their pictures, bringing in the snack or whatever was being served to them, their lunch, and then at the end, taking out the dishes. So we all wore lots of hats. I have to say one of my favorites was being his post-presidency photographer, and one of the fun things about releasing this book is There's some great photos in here which have never been published before, and in fact, the cover photo of the book I snapped one day just walking into the office. The lighting was just perfect. He always looked very handsome and had a pleasant look on his face, but there was something about that day that was special. And I said, Mr. President, you look especially handsome today. Do you mind if I take your picture? And he was typical, well, all right. So I went out the camera and snapped this photo, never imagining that all these years later it would wind up on the cover of a book. But my job ran the spectrum. It was so much fun. It's kind of pinch me moment. You know, I look back on my life and say, did this really happen? I was very young, and he kind of ruined and spoiled me. I will never have a better job or a better boss. The private planes, the Secret Service-driven motorcades, the star-studded events were really remarkable. And there were definitely those snapshot moments that I wanted to capture in my mind, and I wanted to always remember. But I had a job to do, and I not only had to keep pace with this man, but I definitely had to be 3 or 5 or 10 steps ahead of him. And those steps better be in the right direction. So as much as I wanted to savor each and every moment, I really had to be on my toes at every moment of the day. But traveling with him, getting to see him behind the scenes, you know, one of the questions I get most of all is, what was he really like? And was he really as great of a person as I thought and hoped that he was? And I don't know how many of you have met other celebrities, other politicians, and sometimes we put people up on a pedestal and we think, oh, I can't wait to meet that person. I bet they're just wonderful. And then, unfortunately, sometimes we meet those people, and sometimes it's a little bit of a disappointment, right? Ronald Reagan was one of those that, regardless of the pedestal you put him on, when you met him in person, he was more charming, more kind, more attentive, more appreciative, even ladies more handsome in person than you thought was possible. My job ran the spectrum, everything from extraordinary days to, if you could call them, ordinary days in the office. This very unlikely pair developed a great semblance of working together, and we got a lot of things done. We had a lot of fun. We kept on a very disciplined routine schedule. He was a man of routine. He really liked that. There was a great predictability in the way he liked to work, and so he made my job very easy. He was a very hard worker. He was very eager to be available and accessible to the people who had elected him, and I always appreciated his cheerfulness. He would come into the office every day with a skip in his step and a smile on his face and ready to get to work. And here's a man where you think about his life story, and he started into the most challenging job of his life, and arguably anybody's life, at an age where most people think that retirement is here. And I see a few people in here that have maybe chosen to retire, and that's great, but Ronald Reagan at the age of 68, 69 years old, decided to run for president of the United States. And then after serving 8 years in the White House, he came back to LA. Nobody would have faulted him if he wanted to go off and ride off into the sunset up at the ranch and retire and play golf. But that still wasn't who he was and what he wanted to do. He felt that there was still unfinished business, and he came to the office almost every day. And people, one of the comments I've gotten so many times about the book is people didn't realize that after he left the White House, he lived another 15 years. I worked for him 10 of those, and even 5 years into his post-presidency, when he announced to the world that he had Alzheimer's. In a lot of ways, the world started saying goodbye to him at that point. But I was still saying good morning to him every day for the next 5 years. This was a man who was disciplined, who had a work ethic unlike any other, and really had a joyful, cheerful spirit about everything he approached. So of course there were ordinary days in the office, but there were also extraordinary days. I got to witness historic signatures. I got to travel on private planes. It completely ruined me. Now every time I curl up in a coach, I'm crammed in there like a sardine. You ever think about how we get photos of private meetings? When everybody leaves the room, the photographer gets to stay. So I got to be the ultimate fly on the wall for all of Ronald Reagan's meetings. Everybody from Lady Margaret Thatcher, here they are at a black tie event. I took some photos of them going through the library before the event. And then one of my favorite moments I captured, which a lot of you can probably relate to on an evening like this, if you can see the ladies have their shoes kicked off, they're in their stocking feet, and if you see Ronald Reagan's face, he's got his eyes rolled in the back of his head as if to say, good Lord, ladies, stop talking so we can go home. Not that anyone here can relate to that, but he's a real man. At the end of the day, their feet hurt and they wanted to go home, and I love this photo. So many world leaders came in. I love this picture in particular. It looks like just a nice, ordinary picture of Ronald and Nancy Reagan, but when you realize I snapped this, at the moment that Margaret Thatcher, the elevator doors opened and she walked out, you realize the joy on their faces. It was a true friendship. They were delighted to see her. He's like a little kid, so excited his friend Margaret is there. So over the course of the years, people like Gorbachev came in, Mother Teresa, let's see, sorry, these are not clicking through, there we go. Reagan diplomacy was very unusual and very, very Reagan-esque, if we can say that. It did not look like a bunch of rhetoric. It was very relational. It didn't look political. It looked very personal. And you wonder how much could be accomplished if we focused on diplomacy still being based on relationships and very personal. Post-presidency, world leaders came from all over the globe to see him, to talk with him, to pay their respects and to visit with him. They didn't do it because they had to for diplomatic or protocol reasons. They did it because they wanted to. They had a relationship with him that they wanted to continue all those years later. And come they did from all over the world. Gorbachev came, Prime Minister Nakasone from Japan, Chancellor Helmut Kohl, who recently passed away, the Chancellor of Germany, Prime Minister Ryan Mulroney and his wife Mila from Canada, who was such a dear friend of President Reagan's. Lech Walesa came from Poland. Even Mother Teresa came from Calcutta. And to watch these two individuals interact, each having their own very different platforms of influence and yet use them to benefit and bless so many people around the world. There was an authenticity about Ronald Reagan. Anybody who had the opportunity to meet him would see that. There was the genuine twinkle in his eyes, and he would look into your eyes and greet you and say hello. And for that moment, you knew you were the most important person in the world to him. He was comfortable, of course, in black tie with the pomp and circumstances of being president, but he also loved being up the ranch in his boots and his blue jeans and his belt buckle. Here he is with Lady Margaret Thatcher and Mrs. Reagan up at the ranch. Lady Thatcher doesn't exactly look like she owned any ranch attire. They had a nice visit nonetheless. It was a very proper ranch visit. But when Ryan Mulroney came up to the ranch, he certainly came much more ready to enjoy the ranch and get out there and bounce around the Secret Service-driven Suburban and see the property up there on that beautiful hilltop in Santa Barbara. This actually is President Reagan behind the wheel of his Jeep. He loved to drive that Jeep, but realized this man had not driven in 8 years. So when he was behind the wheel, you wanted to get off the road. That's the head of his Secret Service detail in the back, who looks terrified. I don't know if you know Ronald Reagan's life story, but what an inspiring only in America story it is. He came from very humble beginnings. He was born in 1911, February 6, 1911, in the middle of a snowstorm in the midst of the Great Depression. His family was very poor. His father was an alcoholic, and by all measures, you would think this poor little kid doesn't have a chance in life. But he was raised by a mother who was a woman of faith who taught him to believe that God has a plan for everyone. And even seemingly random twists of fate are all part of his plan. And in the end, everything will work out for the best. And aren't we grateful he had a mother like that who raised him to believe in the value and the benefit of community and of church and of faith and of trusting God to even take these little pieces of a life and build something beautiful out of them. We know Ronald Reagan is a great communicator, but I think we also know him as the great optimist. And there's a few people in this room who probably remember the 1970s, maybe just a few. And if you recall, taxes were high, inflation was high, unemployment was high. But worst of all, American morale was incredibly low. And yet on day one of Ronald Reagan's presidency, he took office and he began using entirely different language. He began saying, "It's morning in America. There's a new dawn ahead. There's a shining city on the hill, and we are all part of it." And even though in actuality nothing changed on day one of Ronald Reagan's presidency, the perception had entirely changed. And that started making all the difference in the world. And how far optimism goes, backed up by a good plan, but he really changed the game. With optimism, we began to believe in ourselves again. And when you asked Ronald Reagan at the end of his presidency what he was most proud of, it wasn't anything he had done. It was that we, the people, had come together to change and right the ship and headed in the right direction, and that we, the people, had accomplished great things together in the 1980s while he was president. He was also a great man of humility, which may seem surprising for somebody who was on the world stage. But he kept this sign on his desk that I love that said, "There's no limit to what a man can do or where he can go, so long as he doesn't mind who gets the credit." That was not just a sign on his desk, that was the way he lived his life. And there were so many ways he exhibited this humility in the way he lived. There was little things I loved, like when we would go up and down stairs, he would reach over and hold my elbow, which I thought was especially sweet since I was in my 20s and he was in his 80s. And one particular time I remember we were in the office and we had brought in a bunch of extra furniture because we had a press conference in there. And at the end of the press conference, I was one at a time carrying out these big, heavy wooden and leather chairs back and forth to the conference room to put them back where they belong. And on one of my trips back and forth, I felt like somebody was following me. No, it wasn't the lurking president here. It was Ronald Reagan, and he was walking behind me carrying a chair. And I stopped and I said, "It's okay, Mr. President, I'll come back and get that." And he put that chair down and he looked me square in the eye and he said, "What makes you think you can carry a chair any better than I can?" Okay, sir, right this way. One of the things about the book that I think has resonated most widely, and I knew the flag-waving patriots on the right would love the book, I've been surprised by the reaction from the left, that the book has been featured in places like the Huffington Post and People magazine and on the Today Show, because there's a longing for that political civility that existed with Ronald Reagan. He truly respected people of all kinds. He was always looking for ways to bring people together, not to divide, and looking to include people in his vision and not exclude. He had great respect for women. He talks about his mother as being the most important person in his early life. We all know, of course, of his beautiful love story with Mrs. Reagan, and that was something that was completely genuine. And we loved seeing them behind the scenes. I wrote an entire chapter about President and Mrs. Reagan and their relationship and how beautiful it was to witness it behind the scenes. He had great respect for Mother Teresa, this little tiny woman that he revered as a giant on the world stage. And of course was always very proud that he had put the first woman on the Supreme Court and the appointment of Sandra Day O'Connor. He was a man of incredible patriotism, and this was not just something that he did when the cameras were rolling. You would expect presidents to be very patriotic. But in the office, even when there was just a few staffers around, sometimes on special occasions we would bring a group in that would play music for him or sing or perform for him. And of course, what do you sing for a president? Patriotic music. And I would watch this man, and he would be sitting there listening to these beautiful songs of our country. And he would tap his toes in time. He would be singing every word. He knew every word to every verse, verses I didn't even know existed. He knew them all. And sometimes I would look over and you would see him stand out of respect, singing along. And every now and then you would look over and see even his eyes misting over with tears as he sang of his beloved America. He loved this country with every ounce of his being, and it was contagious and infectious to be around it. The patriotism ran so deep. He used to tease Mrs. Reagan that there was another woman in his life, and she was okay with it because it was Lady Liberty. And really, over the course of my 10 years with him, I learned everything I would ever need to know about how to lead and how to live from this remarkable man. Not by a list of things that he told me I should know, but just by the way he lived his life. One of the things he taught me that just has profoundly affected me is your legacy is not something that's written after you're gone. It's something that's written with every day of your life, and what a great reminder and challenge to all of us to lead and live as if our legacy depends on it, because it does. Ronald Reagan wasn't consumed by what people would say about him after he was gone. It was important to him to live every day to the fullest and treat people with respect and with kindness and with graciousness, and be strong and powerful for those who were powerless. And his legacy looms large and long because of that. Walking out into public with Ronald Reagan reminded me every day how fortunate I was to be there and to watch people respond to him. Anywhere and everywhere we would go, the crowds would cheer and the crowds would gather. And there's so many things that we love and remember about this man. You know, I believe that we loved Ronald Reagan because we loved ourselves and we loved America when he was president, and what a great feeling that was. And then, of course, when he passed away, we watched the outpouring of affection and respect from across the nation and around the world for this man. Most people had never even met him, and yet took time from their busy days and their busy lives to stand in line, sometimes hours, just to walk past his flag-draped casket. And you wonder what causes people to respond to somebody like that, in a way like that. I believe Ronald Reagan was always somebody who extended kindness. He extended respect. you responded to him because you knew that he cared about you. And we cared about him because he always had cared about us. America, my home.